presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me just give you a couple words about my background. I'm not some anti-war activist. I fought with the United States Marines in Vietnam. I was wounded attacking communist positions. Both of my radio men were killed right next to me. I also was a pilot. I flew 269 combat missions, came back with bullet holes in the plane 4 times. I will tell you, though, while that's a pretty good record in the United States military, it is petty cash relative to the enormous heroism of the Syrian military forces. And I think all of the honor goes to them, because I was there for a year fighting, and while it was very fierce combat, they are there year after year after year, and so they deserve great credit. I did not start off with my interest in Syria because of Syria. I have had a long interest in foreign policy that goes back over 50 years. And I was, while I fought in Vietnam as a Marine officer, I was later an Army JAG officer at the Pentagon, and also served in Europe, where I was responsible for legal affairs in North Africa and the Middle East. And so while I did not personally travel, I had a very fine international affairs officer who would give me reports on what was going on in Saudi Arabia and in Egypt and various places, and it was kind of an eye-opener, particularly when it came to Saudi Arabia. That is a different kind of a country. Okay, well let me get started, because what I want to do is to go through the background on the Syrian war, and at the very end, some recommendations that I have, and perhaps we can go into a discussion. I apologize that it's a bit long, but it is not only sort of an overview of the war, but a little bit of my trip to Syria, which ended the end of April of this year. A wonderful trip over there. I spent a couple of hours during the trip, actually towards the end of the trip, with President Bashar al-Assad, and one of the most delightful things is that you know, I felt like I had known him, because I do what I call open source intelligence, where I study everything. I mean, propaganda from the left, propaganda from the right. I study things from Syria, from Israel, from Iran, from Russia, from Britain, from the United States, and you synthesize it all and you begin to form a very clear picture. I did this when I had a top secret compartmentalized clearance with the Army, and interestingly, while I'd be briefed on top secret matters, there was never a single thing they briefed me on that I did not know about and understand before I ever got the briefing. So this is very much the same way that I do things with Syria, and it began with an examination of Libya. And when we attacked Libya, I thought, what a strange thing. Libya, you know, we had normalized relations. We'd had some problems with them in the past, but for years, they had become our top ally, our #1 ally in the war on terror in North Africa. And Libya was very successful. It had the highest per capita income of any country in North Africa. And so it intrigued me. Why are we making an attack on a neutral, non-belligerent country, which clearly is a violation of the law of war? And I thought, well, maybe it's about oil. Oil's a little part of it, but I'll get to that. That's not the real reason. But I want to say about President Assad, you know, we always try to, before we oust people and overturn them, we turn them into monsters. We call them bad guys. If you're a bad guy, then you are likely to die. Okay, this is kind of the way it's, you know, it's like an SOP. They've got a book somewhere in the Central Intelligence Agency in the State Department that tells you what to do. I will tell you, I had studied him in 2011, and I had studied his wife. There are numerous YouTube videos where you can listen to him at length. And I was quite impressed because he struck me as intelligent, very soft-spoken, very, very reserved in his language. And when I met him, he was precisely what I had seen years earlier. Very much a gentleman. And then at a certain point, I said, you know, I was so impressed. I had watched the videos of you, and I had watched the videos of your wife. I said, I'm so sorry that I'll be unable to see her. And then as we continued our discussion, Asma Al-Assad showed up. I have to tell you, of all the first ladies on earth, she has to be the #1. She is so joyous, she's outgoing, she's happy, but you know, we've become accustomed to thinking of first ladies as somehow being pretentious and pompous and self-centered and so forth. And I've got to tell you, if you ran into her in the grocery store and you dropped something on the floor, she'd be the one to pick it up and say, how are you today? She is a delightful lady. I wish I had pictures of her. She's just the finest person. And I would tell you, if she went on television in the United States, nobody in this country would believe that she could be married to a monster that we portray with all of the propaganda. So it was a very, very, very enjoyable, very pleasant meeting with President Assad. And of course, I've had correspondence with him, which shook the whole world. When I wrote to him in 2014, everybody said, how can you possibly write a letter to a dictator who's done this and that? I said, look, I said two things. One, thank you for the gallantry of the Syrian army in rescuing all of those people who were enslaved along the Kalaman mountain range. And number two, I said, I cannot explain to you why the United States, that lost 3,000 people in the 9/11 attacks from Al-Qaeda, is now supporting Al-Qaeda and turning them loose to terrorize the people of Syria. And interestingly, I told the people in my office, they panicked at first. They said, oh my gosh, all these calls are coming in, and I was out of town the first day. I said, well, put everybody who calls, put them on, and I'll talk to them personally. And I talked to them. There were a few jihadists, honestly. But even they, you know, they realized that I understood exactly what was going on. And most of the people would end up by saying, you know, I really didn't know that that was going on. And by talking to all of these people who obviously had a great passion and interest, all of a sudden it began a thought process that really has reverberated around the world and hopefully will result in success in the end.